and especially my own team. And I know you hate when I start the show talking about my own team, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's just a great segue to go into this because we're talking about COVID. And obviously, last week, Big Ben Roethlisberger, who very well should be in the conversation for MVP. I'm going to say this every week until somebody finally listens to me. But Big Ben Roethlisberger was unable to practice with his team at all. He attended meetings virtually through Zoom meetings, which, I mean, look, those are great, but you and I can have Zoom meetings all day long. But if I don't throw you the ball and we don't get that timing down, it's got to be difficult. You would think it's got to be difficult to go out and play football. But Big Ben proved us wrong Sunday with a huge win over the Bengals, 36-10.
You would think that not having that practice time on the field could really affect the team. But when you're Big Ben Roethlisberger and you've been the leader of this franchise for over a decade, and I mean, we've already seen the rapport that he has with that phenomenal receiving core, Juju, Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, the rookie Chase Claypool. Big Ben's got it down. I mean, it looks like he doesn't even need to practice. If I'm Big Ben, I'm like, dude, he just had his best performance of the year so far. So if I'm Big Ben, I'm like, maybe I don't need to practice at all.
Right.
He's old, he's a little beat up. So he's probably like, I can just zoom in and, tell everyone what they need to know. And it's funny you brought up the COVID protocol that he was in. And I mentioned this last week when we were talking about this game. Matthew Stafford was in a similar situation where he was in close contact with someone
the week before, right?
Right, the week before. And there was talk about, oh man, he has to be cleared by Sunday morning. That was that was the deadline where he has to, I think, pass his third consecutive negative test Sunday morning. Then he'll be out there. So I mean, it's a real game time decision. Big Ben, the same thing, but.
Well, Ben was lucky in the fact that he was able to pass his final COVID test on Saturday.
Okay.
So he was able to attend the walkthrough. So Saturday he did attend a quick, brisk walkthrough with the team. They may have made an extended walkthrough because he hadn't practiced all week long. But I don't think Stafford was able to even see his team until Sunday morning. Like he just showed up and was like, I'm playing.
Yep.
So they really had no idea if he was playing at all. So between the two, the Pittsburgh did have the slight advantage of knowing on Saturday that Ben would be able to play.
I mean, Pittsburgh has many advantages over the Detroit Lions. Let's be honest about that. So, I mean, that's just true. I love that organization. I mean, they're a rival to my near and dear Baltimore Ravens, but you can't help but respect and just admire the way that they go out and play football. And like I said, Big Ben had his best game of the season, threw for over 333 yards, 4 touchdowns. But what you really love to see is that he got that plethora of wide receivers involved heavily. I mean, Deontay Johnson had a big day, which I said he would in my fantasy column. And I said to watch out, even if Big Ben doesn't play, I like Deontay Johnson because of how cheap he was. I think he was only $5,200 on DraftKings. So he was cheaper than both Juju Smith-Schuster and Chase Claypool. However, this as a Steeler fan, Deontay Johnson is Big Ben's number one target when he's healthy. He leads the team in targets when he's out there.
Can be.
And receptions. And he had 116 yards and a touchdown, but both Juju and Claypool had touchdowns. They all had big days for fantasy.
Because what a lot of people, if you just look at the box score, what you don't understand is Deontay Johnson had 116 yards and a couple touchdowns in the first half.
Yeah.
And then I don't think he was targeted again, or if he was targeted very little. And I don't think he didn't have a catch in the second half for sure. But he may have been targeted, but they were really working him early. And I think they may have changed some coverage on him. The one thing Pittsburgh has an advantage that a lot of teams do not have is they are so deep at wide receiver, and they use Eric Ebron like just a big wide receiver. You just don't know how to match up with them. If it's Ebron, Juju, and Claypool, that's 3 really big-bodied wide receivers you got to figure out. Then you throw James Washington in there, and he's only 6 foot tall or 5'11", but James Washington's built like a truck. And then you got Deontay Johnson, who's a little quick guy, and then you got Ray McLeod, who's like lightning, and you're constantly just trying to figure out where are the matchups here where we don't get burned and get in trouble. So I think yesterday, this is my opinion without trying to be a homer, I think yesterday, if Big Ben is not in the MVP conversation for the conventional news media this week, after an incredible game yesterday, after taking this team from 8-8 to 9-0, if he's not part of the MVP conversation, he never, ever, ever will be if it doesn't happen after this week. Now, we're talking about MVPs, and we would be remiss if after covering my team and talking about my beloved Pittsburgh Steelers, if we did not talk about last year's MVP and your favorite team, the Baltimore Ravens, in a game that I at least 50% predicted. And I know you don't want to give me credit for all of it. We've already had this conversation before the show. You don't want to give me credit for all of it. But, Michael, let's be honest. I called it a little bit.
Oh, yeah, maybe? Absolutely. You did. And we were both in an agreement. Now, I think we both had the Ravens to win this game. But you did bring up that, they're the Patriots. Bill Belichick, the number one thing that he does is take away the other team's best player. And he certainly did that with Lamar this week. I mean, that was just such an ugly game, though, between the rain and just the field conditions and just seeing it was almost like a monsoon happening.
Well, I will give you credit for the fact that, because I realized that you made, for those of you watching on YouTube, you have see these little slides that are made by our artist Cleo, and the slide says Ravens 17, Patriots 23 if you're listening at home, and then next to it says heavy rain holds down the Ravens. So obviously it wasn't the Patriots. You're saying that it was just the rain that held down the Ravens. Is that what is that what we're saying?
Hey, I'm saying there's an entire team that goes into producing this show, and I don't have full say over the titles here, but I can't deny
really? Who wrote that? Cleo wrote that?
I wrote it, but it passes through a couple of eyeballs there, so there were no disagreements. Apparently, that the heavy rain held down the Ravens.
Cleo works for you. You're her boss. He's like, oh, no one disagreed with me. It's like, you're her boss. You said put this on a graphic. What do you think she was going to do? Say no?
It's also accurate. I mean, look, there was not.
I'm not even sure she knows anything about sports. I think she just does whatever you tell her to.
The point is, there was not a lot of good performances from anyone in that game, and I had thought that the Ravens would get out and try to run the ball, and they only had 115 rushing yards. That's a season low, I think, for the Ravens.
Yeah,
and I mean, I guess that goes back to what we said. Bill Belichick and that Patriots defense will shut down the most potent attack of the opposing team. That's clearly the Baltimore Ravens rushing offense.
Well, here's something that I noticed, though, watching the game yesterday. Obviously, the Patriots don't have the talent they used to have, but they do have pieces that will fit in multiple areas. And the Patriots took what the Steelers did against the Ravens last year and what the Steelers attempted to do this year but failed at, and they just did it way better. They ran multiple outside linebackers. They really played a defense that was more like a 4-4 defense, almost daring the Ravens to throw. They really cramped up the box. You got it, and they stayed in their gaps. And in that rainy conditions where there wasn't a lot of ability to cut the way like a J.K. Dobbins will, or way a Marvin Ingram will, or even Lamar, of course, yeah. Any of those guys without that ability to cut, only saying I'm going through the B gap and having the B gap covered by a 300-pound lineman, a defensive lineman, or an inside linebacker, it was tough sledding. And I'm super disappointed because I stuck up for your OC last week, said that he was one of the most creative guys in football, and he was unable to come up with a plan and a change in the middle of that game. I don't know. I don't know if he's the guy moving forward. I got to be honest.
I'd have to agree. I mean, when we talked about this last week, if Greg Roman and Lamar are going to butt heads, I think we're all going to side with Lamar. Now, Lamar's comments after the game, I don't know if you saw this, but they asked him about that. They asked him, was this a problem? Was the Patriots defense calling out plays? And he said no. He said no. He said that was not an issue. Greg Roman did great. The play calls were excellent. We just didn't perform. And I think that was the truth there. I mean, you talk about adjustments. There's no better adjuster in the game than Bill Belichick. So while Greg Roman, maybe he didn't adjust enough, let's also be fair and say that he was going up against the greatest adjustment coach of all time.
Well, let me say this though. Let me say this really quick, and I don't want to like blow smoke on top of your man crush, but the one thing I will say about Lamar Jackson is from everything I've seen about him, at least in his public persona, which to me seems, unlike Russell Wilson, seems to be incredibly genuine.
Oh yeah,
he seems to be a real person. Is that he is a team first guy, which is surprising with a guy who's that talented. He just wants to win. And I don't believe that he intentionally threw Greg Roman under the bus earlier last week. I do not believe his intention. His intention when he was speaking to Rich Eisen was to say that to create something. I think he just spoke from the heart. That was a very genuine and real moment where he was like, sometimes we go to the line and they're calling out our plays, and didn't realize that he was going to make that controversy. So with that in mind, I think that this week he was conscious of the fact that when they asked him, are they calling out your plays? He was going to say no. They could have stood right there and said, he's getting the ball, and he could have got the ball. And he was definitely going to go back to the press and go, nothing happened. Greg Roman's the best in the world. I just feel like that's his personality, which is, to me, the personality you want as a quarterback. He accepts all the blame. He's not giving it to anybody else. He's going to put it all on his shoulders. Now, it's going to wear on him after a while. But to me, I think that may be what happened there. That's just my opinion. And before we go to the next segment, I'd like to hear what you think about that. Do you think it's possible that he internalized that and didn't share it? Or do you think that was a genuine moment when he said it didn't happen?
I mean, we're not out on the field, so I'm not sure. It's hard to say whether, they're actually calling out the plays or not. So I can't really answer that. But what I can say is that I completely agree with you. And it just looks good from a PR standpoint, from a chemistry standpoint, that he has completely, put an end to that conversation, saying it wasn't Greg Roman's fault. Everything worked the way it was supposed to do. It was just on me. It was on us. We didn't perform well. And my favorite quote from him after the game, he said, "We're ticked off." And I think that's accurate. I mean, they just lost, two games in the last 3 weeks, and to two great teams, obviously the Steelers and the Patriots. The Ravens always play the Patriots tough. So, that's tough to see them lose that. But Lamar's comments about being ticked off and really trying to focus headed forward, because as you know, they play the Steelers again on Thanksgiving in 2 weeks. And next week they have the Tennessee Titans, who, also look good. Yeah, they just got beat by the Colts, but those are two really tough matchups.
They're a tough team. They're a tough team.
Very tough. So two really tough matchups for the Ravens coming up. I like to see that they're pissed off and that they're, they got to be, because, they already have more losses this year than they did all of last season. So the team definitely doesn't look the same. But you talked about Lamar's attitude and his heart of a lion, as I like to say. He's a winner. He's a leader. So
okay, as soon as you start calling him a heart, as soon as you start with the heart of a lion thing, I know it's time to move on to the very next segment.